The clinking of ice against crystal was the only sound Alistair Finch tolerated. Everything else, the saccharine strings of the quartet, the obsequious laughter of his peers, the auctioneer's droning catalogue of human generosity, was noise. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the Grand Imperial Ballroom, a solitary monolith in a sea of glittering minnows. Below, the city sprawled, a circuit board of lights he had helped design, conquer, and own. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke tuxedo, the platinum links of his watch catching the chandelier's light. It was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, a timepiece that cost more than the annual budget of the charity he was supposedly here to support. The irony was a currency he spent freely. A woman with a smile as brittle as spun sugar drifted towards him. "Alistair, darling, so good of you to come. Your donation was, well, it left us all speechless." He gave a curt nod, his eyes remaining fixed on the cityscape. "It's a tax deduction, Clarissa. Nothing more." She flinched, her smile cracking at the edges, before she retreated into the warmth of the crowd. He preferred the cold. The cold was honest. It was then that he felt a faint tug at the sleeve of his jacket. Annoyed, he glanced down, expecting another sycophant. Instead, he saw a child. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, with wide, unnervingly serious eyes the color of moss after a rainstorm. Her dress was a threadbare thing of faded yellow, a smudge of what looked like chocolate on the collar, and she was holding up a piece of paper. It wasn't even paper. It was a napkin, crumpled and soft from use. On it was a child's scrawl in purple crayon. He recoiled slightly, a flicker of disgust crossing his features. "What is this?" His voice was a low growl, meant to intimidate, to dismiss. The little girl simply pushed the napkin closer. He took it, his manicured fingers barely touching the corners as if it were contaminated. It was a pathetic drawing, a lopsided tree, a squiggle of a fence, and a sun with too many rays in the corner. "Get this art project away from me," he sneered, his voice loud enough for those nearby to turn. "Some people should learn their place." He was about to crumple the napkin, to let the meaningless scrawl drop to the polished floor, when his eyes snagged on a detail. It wasn't the tree itself, but the way a single branch was bent, almost broken, pointing downwards at an unnatural angle. And below it, next to the crude fence, was a shape. 3 circles stacked in a small pyramid. A symbol he hadn't seen in 30 years. A symbol his grandfather had carved into the stock of his hunting rifle. A symbol that was supposed to be a secret lost to time, buried with the man himself. The ballroom noise faded to a dull roar in his ears. The crystal glass in his hand trembled, the ice chiming a frantic, sudden alarm. He looked from the napkin to the girl, but she was already gone, melting back into the forest of expensive gowns and tailored suits, leaving him clutching a cheap napkin that held the ghost of a dead man and the key to a lifetime of searching. The world snapped back into focus with the force of a physical blow. Alistair's knuckles were white where he gripped the napkin. His heart, an organ he usually treated with the detached interest of a mechanic, was hammering against his ribs. He shoved the half-full glass of scotch onto a passing waiter's tray without a word, his eyes scanning the crowd with a predator's intensity. Yellow. He was looking for a faded yellow dress. But in the kaleidoscope of couture, silk, and satin, the simple color was impossible to find. He strode through the throng, ignoring the greetings and startled looks. "Alistair, wonderful to see," a portly man began, but Alistair pushed past him, as if he were a piece of furniture. He reached the edge of the ballroom, the crowd thinning near the service corridors. Nothing. He spun around, his gaze sweeping the room again. Panic, cold and unfamiliar, began to prickle at the edges of his composure. He had spent millions, employed teams of private investigators, geologists, and historians to find the location marked by that symbol, and they had all failed. Now the answer had been handed to him, on a greasy napkin, by a child he had insulted and driven away. The sheer cosmic absurdity of it was galling. He spotted Marcus, his head of security, standing impassively near the main entrance. Alistair moved towards him, his strides long and purposeful. Marcus, a former Special Forces operative with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, saw him coming and straightened slightly, his hand instinctively moving towards his earpiece. "Sir?" Alistair didn't break his stride. "A girl, 6 or 7 years old, faded yellow dress. Find her." He held up the napkin, a flag of surrender to his own disbelief. "She gave me this. I need to know who she is and where she lives. Now." Marcus glanced at the drawing, his expression unchanging, though a flicker of confusion crossed his eyes. He'd seen Alistair Finch move mountains for a business deal, crush competitors with a single phone call, but he had never seen this look on his face. A raw, desperate hunger. "Do you have anything else to go on, sir?" "She was with a woman. I didn't see her clearly. Probably the mother. They don't belong here. They must have come in through the kitchens, or as part of the cleaning staff. Check the service entrance logs, security footage, everything. I want them found by morning." "Yes, sir." Marcus spoke into his wrist. "Lock down the event footage. I want eyes on every exit, time-stamped from 5 minutes ago. Priority is a woman and child, non-attendees." Alistair paced back to his secluded window, the napkin still in his hand. He smoothed it out on the cool marble of the sill. The lopsided oak with its broken branch, the crooked fence, the 3 circles. It was all there, just as his grandfather had described it in their last conversation, his voice a rattling whisper from a hospital bed. "Don't look for the money, Ollie," the old man had wheezed, his hand gripping Alistair's with surprising strength. "Look for the roots. Find the broken branch. That's where it all begins again." Alistair had been 20 at the time, arrogant and impatient. He'd thought the old man was delirious, speaking in metaphors about family legacy. For 10 years, he'd ignored the words, focusing instead on rebuilding the Finch empire from the ashes of his grandfather's spectacular failure. He'd succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, becoming richer and more powerful than his grandfather had ever been. But it was empty. The ghost of that failure, the whispers that he was merely a scavenger, picking at the bones of a greater man's legacy, haunted him. So he had started searching. He'd searched for the land his grandfather had lost in a final, disastrous poker game. He'd searched for the fabled nest egg the old man had supposedly hidden away. But the records were gone, the land long since subdivided and sold off, the trail cold for decades. Until now, a child with moss-green eyes and a purple crayon had just reignited a 30-year-old obsession. He folded the napkin carefully and placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket, the cheap paper feeling more valuable than the platinum watch on his wrist. The party was over for him. The real hunt had just begun. By dawn, Alistair was in his penthouse office, a cavern of glass and steel overlooking the waking city. He hadn't slept. He'd been replaying the moment over and over, The feel of the small hand tugging his sleeve, the solemn weight in the child's gaze. It felt like a visitation, a message from the past, delivered by its smallest, most unlikely emissary. Marcus entered without knocking, his face impassive as always. He placed a tablet on the vast obsidian desk. "We found them." Alistair leaned forward, his entire body tense. "Where?" "A tenement on the south side. The Iron Rose, they call it. The woman's name is Sarah Jensen. Works for the event's third-party catering service. She wasn't supposed to bring her daughter, Lily, but her babysitter canceled at the last minute. She kept her in the kitchen for most of the night. The girl must have slipped out during a service changeover." The tablet showed a grainy security image of a tired-looking woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, hurrying a small girl in a yellow dress out a service exit. The girl, Lily, glanced back at the camera for a moment, and her expression was not that of a child caught misbehaving, but of someone who had completed an important task. Alistair zoomed in on her face. Those eyes. It was as if she knew things she had no right to know. "What else?" "Sarah Jensen, 32 years old, widowed, works 2 jobs, the catering gig is her weekend work. Lily is 7, attends the local public school, spotty attendance record. They're behind on rent. The kid has a medical file, mild asthma, nothing out of the ordinary. They're poor, sir. That's the long and short of it." "Prepare the car," Alistair said, standing up. "I'm going there." Marcus blinked. "Sir, if I may, sending an associate might be more appropriate. A direct approach could be intimidating." "Intimidating is the point, Marcus," Alistair said, straightening his tie. "I want answers, not a polite conversation. I've wasted 30 years on this. I'm not wasting another day." The Iron Rose was a blight on the city's otherwise gleaming facade. It was a place Alistair's limousine was never meant to be, its polished black exterior looking like a hearse in the grim gray street. The buildings were rust-stained brick, fire escapes clinging to them like skeletal ribs. Children played in the street with a worn-out soccer ball, stopping to stare as the silent, tinted windows of the car slid to a halt. Alistair stepped out, his $1,000 leather shoes landing on a cracked pavement littered with bottle caps. The air smelled of damp concrete and fried onions. He felt a visceral revulsion. This was the world he had clawed his way out of, the world of quiet desperation and decay. Marcus was a half-step behind him as he entered the building. The lobby was dark, the linoleum floor curling at the edges. The air was thick with the smell of mold and boiled cabbage. They climbed 3 flights of stairs, the wooden banister sticky to the touch. Apartment 3B had a flimsy door with peeling paint. Alistair didn't knock. He hammered his fist on the wood, the sound echoing in the narrow hallway. After a moment, the door opened a few inches, held by a chain. A woman's tired face appeared in the gap. It was the woman from the security footage, Sarah Jensen. Her eyes, the same moss green as her daughter's, widened in shock and then narrowed with suspicion. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for your daughter," Alistair said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "What do you want with her?" Sarah's voice was sharp, protective. She instinctively tried to close the door, but Alistair put his hand against it, easily holding it open. "She gave me something last night. A drawing. I need to know where she saw it." "A drawing? She's a child. She draws things from her imagination. Now, if you don't mind, you're scaring her." From behind her, the little girl, Lily, peered around her mother's legs. She was wearing the same yellow dress. She looked at Alistair, her expression unreadable, and then hid again. "This is not from her imagination," Alistair insisted, his patience wearing thin. He pulled the napkin from his pocket and held it up. "This place, where did she see it?" Sarah glanced at the drawing, her brow furrowed. "I have no idea. A tree and a fence? It could be anywhere. Now, please, leave us alone." "I am not leaving," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "I will pay you $10,000. Just tell me what this is." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "We don't want your money. You can't just come here and bully people because you're rich. Get out, or I'm calling the police." "The police?" Alistair let out a short, humorless laugh. "Believe me, madam, the police will be on my side." He pushed against the door. The chain strained and groaned. It was a cheap lock, easily broken. But before he could force his way in, the little girl, Lily, stepped out from behind her mother. She held a small, worn chalkboard, the kind used for practicing letters. She held it up for him to see. On it, she had drawn, in perfect, meticulous detail, the front gate of Alistair's own country estate. An estate that was unlisted, miles out of the city, and hidden behind a 10-foot wall. An estate she could not possibly have ever seen. Alistair's breath caught in his throat. He stared from the chalkboard to the girl's solemn face. This wasn't a coincidence. This was something else entirely. He slowly lowered his hand from the door, his mind reeling. The girl wasn't just drawing a random place. She was drawing his past. And she was drawing his present. The sight of his own gate, rendered in chalk by this child's hand, was a shock that cut through Alistair's arrogance like a shard of glass. It wasn't just a lucky guess. The ornate F for Finch was perfectly replicated, the specific pattern of the ironwork, the 2 stone eagles perched atop the pillars, details that weren't public knowledge. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty hallway. He looked at Lily, truly looked at her, and saw not a child, but a cipher. Sarah, mistaking his stunned silence for a retreat, seized the opportunity. "I'm warning you," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Leave, now." Alistair ignored her. His focus was entirely on the girl. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you know that place?" Lily just stared at him, her large green eyes holding his. Then she slowly erased the drawing of the gate with the palm of her hand, leaving a dusty white smear. She turned the chalkboard over. On the other side was another drawing. It was a simple, 4-paned window. Through the window, a single star was visible in a dark sky. A star and a crescent moon. It was another memory, one he had buried so deep, he had almost convinced himself it was a dream. The window of his childhood bedroom, in his grandfather's house, the one that had burned to the ground. He and his grandfather used to look through it at the night sky, and the old man had taught him the constellations. The first one he ever learned was Orion. But from that specific window, due to the angle of the house and a large pine tree, the only prominent celestial bodies you could often see were Venus and the moon, side by side. "The evening star," his grandfather used to call it. "Your grandmother's favorite." Alistair felt a wave of dizziness. He braced himself against the doorframe. This was impossible. This child was drawing things from the deepest recesses of his memory, things no one else could know. He was no longer a powerful billionaire demanding answers. He was a man confronted by a ghost. "Who are you?" he asked, the question directed at the child. Sarah finally slammed the door shut, this time shooting the deadbolt. Alistair heard the chain being refastened. He didn't try to stop her. He just stood there, staring at the peeling paint of door 3B, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and dawning fear. Marcus, who had been standing silently on the landing below, came up the stairs. "Sir, is everything all right?" Alistair turned slowly, his face pale. "Get me everything you can on this family, not just the basics. I want to know who their grandparents were, where they came from. I want to know who they talked to, who they knew, everything. Dig. Dig until you hit bedrock." "Understood, sir." Alistair walked back down the stairs, his steps heavy. The bravado and certainty he'd felt an hour ago had evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of unease. He was a man who believed in numbers, in assets, in tangible realities. He did not believe in magic or miracles. But there was no logical explanation for what had just happened. A 7-year-old girl in a slum was channeling his past. As he slid back into the silent, leather-clad cocoon of his limousine, he took out the napkin again. The crude drawing seemed to mock him now. It wasn't just a map to a place. It was a map into his own life, and he had no idea who the cartographer was. The drive back to his penthouse was silent. Alistair stared out the window at the city he owned, but he didn't see it. He saw a 4-paned window and an evening star. He saw a broken branch on an old oak tree. He saw a little girl with his mother's eyes. No, that couldn't be right. His mother's eyes were blue. But the shade of green, it was familiar. It reminded him of the faded photograph of his grandmother he kept on his desk, the one taken before she fell ill. The connection was tenuous, absurd, yet it lodged in his mind and refused to be dislodged. He had always approached problems with force or money. This was a different kind of problem. It was a lock for which he had no key. Force had failed. Bribery had failed. Perhaps Marcus had been right. A direct approach was not the answer. He needed to understand the source of the girl's knowledge, and that would require something he was not accustomed to using: patience. And perhaps something even more foreign to his nature: trust. He spent the rest of the day in his office, canceling meetings, ignoring calls from his board of directors. He had the napkin, the chalkboard drawings from his memory, and the tablet with the Jensen family's meager file laid out on his desk. It was a puzzle with pieces from 2 different worlds. On one side, the immense wealth and buried history of the Finch dynasty. On the other, the threadbare existence of a single mother and her enigmatic child. And somewhere, in the chasm between those 2 worlds, lay the truth. Late that afternoon, Marcus returned. His face was grim. "Sir, we've dug into the Jensen family history. There's a connection." "What is it?" Alistair demanded, leaning forward. Sarah Jensen's maiden name was O'Malley. Her maternal grandmother was named Eleanor O'Malley. The name meant nothing to Alistair. And Eleanor O'Malley worked as a housekeeper for your grandfather, sir, for over 20 years. She was with the family until the fire. The fire. The event that had destroyed the old Finch manor, taken his grandmother's life, and broken his grandfather's spirit. Alistair sat back in his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. A housekeeper. It was a connection, but it explained nothing. A housekeeper might know the layout of the estate, but she wouldn't know about a secret symbol carved into a rifle stock. She wouldn't know about a private conversation between a boy and his dying grandfather. "Is she still alive?" Alistair asked. "Eleanor O'Malley?" "No, sir. Died 15 years ago. Alzheimer's, according to the records. Sarah was raised by her. Her own parents died in a car crash when she was young. So the grandmother, the only direct link, was gone. Her memories likely lost long before she died. It was another dead end. Yet, the girl knew. The information had to have been passed down somehow. Stories, perhaps? A deathbed confession? But the details were too personal, too specific. "Sir," Marcus continued, hesitating for a moment, "there's something else. Sarah Jensen visits a nursing home, Oakwood Senior Care, 3 times a week. It's in the same neighborhood. We ran a check on the residents she visits." He slid a photograph across the desk. It was of a frail, elderly woman, sitting in a wheelchair by a window, her face a mask of vacant confusion. "Her file says her name is Martha Petrov. No known family. Severe dementia. But the nursing home's long-term records are a mess. Before she was Martha Petrov 20 years ago, her intake papers listed her under a different name, a name the administrator at the time seems to have misspelled or misheard." Marcus paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. The name on the original intake form was Finch. The name hung in the sterile air of the office like a ghost. Finch. Alistair stared at the photo of the woman in the wheelchair. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes cloudy and distant. There was nothing there he recognized. Nothing that connected to the vibrant, laughing woman from the black and white photos of his youth. His grandmother, Elizabeth Finch, had died in the fire. He had been there. He remembered the smoke, the heat, the shattering glass. He remembered his grandfather's raw, animalistic scream when the firefighters held him back. The official report was unequivocal. One fatality, Elizabeth Finch, identified by dental records. "It's impossible," Alistair said, his voice hoarse. "My grandmother is dead. The dental records from the fire were partial, sir," Marcus said quietly. "And the coroner, at the time, a Dr. Abernathy, retired under a cloud of suspicion a few years later. Malpractice, falsifying reports. It's a long shot, but it was the only shot he had. A secret that had been buried for 3 decades, a truth so monstrous it could rewrite his entire life. Could his grandfather have lied? Could he have hidden his wife away, declared her dead to the world? Why? Was it the fire? Had it broken her mind, and he couldn't bear for the world to see her that way? The questions cascaded through his mind, each one more painful than the last. He looked again at the puzzle pieces on his desk, the napkin, the memory of the chalkboard, the photo of the old woman. And at the center of it all, a 7-year-old girl named Lily, the housekeeper's great-granddaughter. Did Eleanor O'Malley help his grandfather hide his wife? Was she the only other person who knew the secret? And had she passed that story, that impossible truth, down to her own family, not as a coherent narrative, but as a series of fragmented images, a folklore of whispers and memories that had somehow imprinted itself on the mind of a child? It was a wild, fantastical theory, but it was the only one that fit the facts. Lily wasn't a mystic. She was a living archive. Alistair stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were beginning to twinkle on, a galaxy he had built to distract himself from the black hole in his own history. For 30 years, he had been searching for a lost fortune, a way to redeem his grandfather's name. But he had been looking for the wrong thing. The treasure wasn't gold or deeds. It was a person. "What about the symbol?" Alistair asked, turning back to Marcus. "The 3 circles. Does that mean anything in this context?" "We're still working on it, sir. But early research suggests it might not be a family crest. It's closer to an old cartographer's mark, or even a hobo symbol. In some variations, it means a safe place, or a secret is kept here." A safe place, where a secret is kept. The broken branch was the landmark. The symbol was the key. He was beginning to see the outlines of the map, and it wasn't leading to treasure. It was leading to a final, hidden truth. His grandfather hadn't just lost his fortune. He had lost his wife, in more ways than one, and had spent the rest of his life creating an elaborate puzzle to protect her, or perhaps to one day lead someone back to her, someone he trusted. Alistair's approach had to change. He couldn't storm back to that apartment with accusations and demands. He was dealing with a fragile legacy, a secret held in the mind of a child and the broken memories of an old woman. He needed Sarah and Lily's help. And to get it, he would have to earn their trust, something his money couldn't buy and his power couldn't command. The next morning, a plain, unadorned van from a local contracting company pulled up outside the Iron Rose. 2 men got out and began unloading equipment. A little while later, they were on the roof of the tenement, patching the leaks that had left water stains on the ceilings of half the apartments, including Sarah Jensen's. That afternoon, the building's wheezing, ancient boiler, which had been on its last legs for years, was replaced by a silent, efficient new model. The tenants whispered among themselves, stunned by their anonymous benefactor. Sarah Jensen watched from her window, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of relief and deep suspicion. Alistair didn't go himself. He stayed in his tower, monitoring the reports. He had the anonymous landlord's fund pay off the back rent for the entire building. He arranged for a delivery of fresh groceries to every door, citing a surplus from a local charity. He was laying siege to their lives, but with kindness instead of force. His biggest move came 3 days later. He found out through Marcus that Lily's school was on the verge of closing its after-school arts program due to budget cuts. It was the one part of school the girl seemed to enjoy, the only place she truly came alive, according to her teachers. Alistair made a single phone call. The next day, the school announced it had received an anonymous donation large enough to fund the arts program for the next 10 years. They were even able to purchase new supplies, fresh paper, vibrant paints, and a whole spectrum of colored chalk. That evening, as Sarah was walking Lily home from school, the girl clutching a box of new crayons like it was treasure, she saw the sleek black car parked across the street. This time, it wasn't menacing. It was just waiting. Alistair Finch stood beside it, not in a tuxedo, but in a simple dark sweater and trousers. He didn't look like a predator. He just looked like a man waiting for an answer. Sarah stopped, pulling Lily slightly behind her. Her defenses, so strong a few days ago, were now riddled with confusion. The patched roof, the hot water, the groceries, and now the art program. It was all him. She knew it. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice softer than before, wary but no longer hostile. "To talk," Alistair said simply. "I was wrong before. I apologize for my behavior. I'd like to start over." He looked past her to Lily. "Your drawings are very important. I think you're trying to tell me a story. I need your help to understand it." Lily peeked out from behind her mother. She looked at Alistair, then at her new box of crayons, and then back at him. She took a step forward and held up a single piece of paper she had drawn on in the new art class. It was another picture. This one was of a tall pine tree, its top sharp like a needle. Next to it was a small house, but the house was smudged with black and red crayon, flames licking at the roof. It was the fire. Alistair felt a familiar pang of old grief. But this time, something was different. From the side of the burning house, a small stick figure was leading another stick figure away, into the woods. One of them was clearly a man. The other, with a triangle for a dress, was a woman. They were walking away from the fire, not trapped within it. It was the story, told in a single, silent image. His grandfather hadn't lost his wife in the fire. He had saved her from it. Sarah gasped, looking at the drawing. "Lily, what is that?" "It's the beginning," Alistair said, his eyes locked on the drawing. He looked at Sarah, his expression stripped of all its usual arrogance, leaving only a raw, pleading vulnerability. "Please, help me find the end." Sarah stood on the cracked pavement, caught between the world she knew, a world of overdue bills and leaking roofs, and the impossible story unfolding in front of her. She looked from Alistair's haunted face to her daughter's drawing of the fire. She remembered the stories her grandmother Eleanor used to tell, not coherent narratives, but fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror. Whispers of a great sadness at the big house, of a lost lady who wasn't gone, but asleep, of a promise she had made to the old man, Mr. Finch. As a child, Sarah had dismissed them as the ramblings of old age. Now they felt like clues. "The nursing home," she said, more to herself than to Alistair. "You know about that?" It wasn't a question. "The woman you visit," Alistair confirmed. "Martha Petrov. I believe she is my grandmother, Elizabeth Finch." The name hung in the air between them. Sarah felt a tremor of shock. The quiet, vacant woman she brought flowers to, the one she visited out of a sense of inherited duty because Eleanor had visited her for years, was the matriarch of the Finch empire? It was absurd. "That's impossible. She has no one." "I think my grandfather wanted it that way," Alistair said, "to protect her. And I think your grandmother helped him. This drawing," he gestured to the paper in Lily's hand, "this is what happened. He got her out. He knelt down, so he was at eye level with Lily. His movements were stiff, unused to this posture of humility. "Lily," he said, his voice gentle, "the other drawing, the one on the napkin, the tree with the broken branch. Can you show me where that is?" Lily looked at her mother, seeking permission. Sarah, her mind reeling, gave a slow, uncertain nod. This was bigger than her fear of this powerful man. This felt like a duty, a debt from a generation past that had fallen to her to settle. Lily turned and pointed, not down a street, but towards the sky, at the hills that rose hazily at the edge of the city. Then she tugged on her mother's sleeve and began walking, not towards their apartment, but towards the bus stop at the end of the block. The bus that went north, out of the city. Alistair straightened up, looking at Sarah. "Where is she going?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but I think we're supposed to follow." The journey was a surreal procession. The billionaire's limousine crawling behind a little girl and her mother on a public bus. They rode for nearly an hour, leaving the grime of the city behind for the winding roads of the suburbs, and then the countryside. Lily sat with her face pressed against the window, watching the landscape roll by. Finally, in a small, sleepy town that was little more than a crossroads, she tugged on the cord to stop the bus. When they got off, they were surrounded by green. Old farmhouses sat nestled in rolling hills. The air was clean and smelled of cut grass. Lily, without hesitation, started walking down a narrow country lane. Alistair and Sarah followed, Marcus trailing at a discreet distance. "My grandfather lost all his land in a card game," Alistair said, breaking the silence. "The records were sealed as part of the settlement. I've had teams trying to locate the exact parcels for years. They were all around here, scattered across this county." Lily seemed to be operating on an internal compass. She took a left turn onto a dirt path that was barely visible, overgrown with weeds. The path led into a dense patch of woods. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked nervously, pulling her daughter a little closer. Lily just nodded, her eyes fixed forward. They walked for another 20 minutes, the light growing dim under the thick canopy of trees. Alistair felt a strange sense of déjà vu. He knew these woods. He had played here as a boy, when this was all still Finchland. His heart began to beat faster. And then they came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a magnificent old oak tree, and from its trunk one large branch jutted out at a bizarre, almost broken angle, pointing directly at the ground. A few feet away was the collapsing remnant of a split-rail fence, its wood gray and weathered with age. It was the place from the drawing. It was real. Alistair stopped, his breath catching in his chest. He looked around, half expecting to see his grandfather step out from behind a tree. Lily walked straight to the base of the broken branch. The ground there was covered in moss and fallen leaves. She stopped and pointed at a single, flat stone that was almost completely submerged in the earth. "What is it?" Sarah asked. Alistair didn't answer. He walked to the stone and knelt, his expensive trousers sinking into the damp soil. He brushed away the leaves and moss. And there, carved into the stone, were 3 small, interlocking circles. The symbol. With trembling hands, he and Marcus worked to pry the stone from the ground. It was heavy, but it came loose, revealing a dark, square hole beneath it. Reaching inside, Alistair's fingers brushed against cold metal. He pulled out a small, heavy iron lockbox, rusted from decades in the damp earth. There was no keyhole. It was sealed shut. "Bring it to the car," Alistair commanded, his voice tight with emotion. As they walked back out of the woods, Lily tugged on his sleeve. When he looked down, she was holding out another drawing she must have made while they were digging. This one was simpler than the others. It was just a key, an old-fashioned, ornate skeleton key. Underneath it, she had drawn a flower, a lily. "A key," Sarah mused, "but where would it be?" Alistair looked at the drawing, and then at the girl. Lily. The flower was a lily. Was it a signature, or another clue? Then it hit him. Not a lily, an iris, his grandmother's favorite flower. His grandfather had planted a bed of rare black irises for her by the small cottage on the far side of the old estate, the one they used as a guest house. It was the only part of the property that hadn't been touched by the fire. Was it possible? Back in the city, Alistair drove directly to the nursing home. He left Marcus with the box and went inside, with Sarah and Lily trailing hesitantly behind him. The smell of disinfectant and regret was overpowering. He found Martha Petrov in the common room, sitting in her wheelchair, staring blankly at a television that wasn't on. Her white hair was thin, her hands knotted with arthritis. "Mrs. Petrov," Sarah said softly, "you have another visitor today." The woman didn't respond. Her eyes remained vacant. Alistair approached slowly, his heart pounding. He knelt in front of the wheelchair, just as he had with Lily. He looked into the old woman's cloudy eyes, searching for a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the woman who had taught him how to ride a bicycle. "Grandmother," he whispered, the word feeling alien on his tongue, "it's Alistair. It's Ali." There was no response. Her face remained a blank slate. Despair began to creep in. Had he been wrong? Was this all just a fantastic delusion? Then Lily stepped forward. She gently took the old woman's hand, the small, supple fingers wrapping around the gnarled, arthritic ones. The old woman blinked. Her head turned slowly, her gaze drifting down to the child holding her hand. Lily held up the drawing of the key and the iris. The woman stared at the drawing for a long time. A flicker of something, not quite recognition, but a deep, instinctual stirring, moved behind her eyes. Her lips parted, and a dry, raspy sound came out, a voice that hadn't been used in years. My garden," she whispered. The words were faint, barely audible, but to Alistair they were a thunderclap. He stood up, his mind racing. The guest house, the iris garden, the key had to be there. He turned to Sarah, a wild, desperate hope in his eyes. "I need you to stay with her. Don't leave her. I'll be back." He raced from the nursing home, leaving Sarah and Lily standing with the old woman. 3 generations of a shared, secret history, finally brought together in the sterile quiet of the common room. Alistair drove like a madman to his country estate, the place Lily had drawn on her chalkboard. He didn't use the main gate. He went around to the old service road, towards the part of the property that had been left to grow wild. He found the guest house covered in ivy, forgotten, and next to it, choked with weeds but still there, was a small, stone-lined flower bed. He tore at the weeds with his bare hands, not caring about the dirt or the thorns. And there, buried beneath a thick root, was a small, oilskin-wrapped package. He tore it open. Inside was an old, ornate, iron skeleton key. It was a perfect match for the drawing. He raced back to the city, the key clutched in his hand. He found Marcus waiting by the car, the lockbox on the seat. Alistair took the box, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key into the lock. It turned with a rusty groan. The lid creaked open. Inside there was no gold, no jewels, no stock certificates. The box was filled with yellowed letters, tied in a faded blue ribbon. On top of the letters was a small, leather-bound journal. Alistair opened it. The first page was in his grandfather's familiar, elegant script. "If you are reading this, Allie, it means the girl found you. Her name is Lily, and she is the great-granddaughter of the only person I ever trusted, Eleanor. I knew you would not stop searching, but I pray you were searching for the right reasons. Not for money, but for the truth." Alistair sank onto the hood of his car, the journal in his hands. He began to read, and as the city lights came on around him, the full, heartbreaking story of the past 30 years finally revealed itself. The journal was not a confession. It was a testament. A story of love, desperation, and unbearable choices. Alistair read under the amber glow of a street lamp, the world of finance and power shrinking until it was nothing more than the cramped, elegant handwriting of a dead man. His grandfather, William Finch, wrote of the fire not as an accident, but as a breaking point. Elizabeth, his grandmother, had been struggling for years with a degenerative mental illness, a precursor to dementia that was poorly understood at the time. It came in waves, long periods of lucidity, followed by terrifying bouts of confusion, paranoia, and memory loss. William had hidden her condition from the world, from his own family, protecting her with a fierce, desperate love. The fire had been started by Elizabeth herself during one of her episodes. She had lit a candle and forgotten it. William had found her cowering in the library, terrified and unaware of what she had done, as the smoke thickened around them. He had gotten her out, just as Lily's drawing had depicted, through the gardens and into the woods, while the world believed she was perishing inside. Eleanor O'Malley, the housekeeper, had found them there. She had been Elizabeth's closest confidant, the only other person who knew the true extent of her illness. Faced with an impossible choice, institutionalizing the woman he loved, subjecting her to the brutal psychiatric treatments of the era, or letting the world believe she was gone, William chose the latter. With Eleanor's help, he created a new life for Elizabeth. He used the chaos of the fire and the corruption of a local coroner to fake her death. He lost the bulk of his fortune in a poker game that was, in reality, a deliberate act. He liquidated his assets, converting them into untraceable bearer bonds and cash to create a trust fund to care for Elizabeth for the rest of her life. He placed her in a quiet, private care facility under the name Martha Petrov, with Eleanor as her only registered visitor and guardian. He had erased Elizabeth Finch from the world to save her. The journal detailed his heartbreak, his loneliness, his guilt over lying to his own grandson. He had created the legend of the lost nest egg and the map as a final, desperate gambit. He feared that after his death, Alastair's obsessive drive would lead him to sell off the last remnants of the family land, including the small, insignificant plot where the box was buried. The map was a test. He knew his grandson would search for treasure, but he hoped that one day he would be wise enough to search for the truth instead. He had entrusted the other half of the story to Eleanor, telling her that if the time ever came, her family should guide Alastair. It was a story passed down, not in words, but in feelings, in images, in a grandmother's whispers to her daughter, and her daughter's stories to her own child, until it settled in the preternaturally receptive mind of a little girl named Lily. Alastair closed the journal, the leather cool against his trembling hands. The anger, the ambition, the cold emptiness that had driven him for 3 decades had been predicated on a lie. He wasn't the redeemer of his family's honor. He was the ignorant inheritor of a profound and tragic love story. He hadn't been chasing a fortune. He had been running from a truth too painful to comprehend. He drove back to the nursing home, the iron box on the seat beside him. He walked back into the common room. Sarah was sitting beside the wheelchair, reading a magazine, while Lily sat on the floor, quietly drawing on her chalkboard. Elizabeth, he could not think of her as Martha anymore, was asleep. Alastair pulled up a chair and sat on her other side. He didn't speak. He just sat there, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. An hour passed in silence. Sarah occasionally glanced at him, her expression soft with a dawning understanding. When Elizabeth finally stirred, her cloudy eyes blinked open, and, for a moment, they seemed to settle on Alastair. He leaned forward. "Grandmother," he said again, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm here. I know everything. Grandfather." He loved you so much. He opened the iron box and took out the bundle of letters. They were from William, written to Elizabeth after he had hidden her away. One for every month until he died. Letters he knew she would likely never read, but that he had to write nonetheless. He began to read one aloud. His voice was shaky at first, but grew stronger as he channeled his grandfather's words. He read of their first dance, of the day he had proposed, of the birth of their son, Alistair's father. He read of the black irises and the evenings spent looking at the stars. As he read, a change came over Elizabeth, a flicker of light in the depths of her eyes. Her hand, which Lily was still holding, twitched. Her lips moved, trying to form words around the memories the letters were stirring. She was still lost in the fog of her illness, but for the first time in years, a sliver of sunlight was breaking through. Alistair knew she might never fully return to him, but she was not gone. She was found, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed, the world of Alistair Finch was turned upside down. He moved his grandmother out of the nursing home and into a private suite in his own penthouse, hiring the best team of geriatric specialists and memory care nurses in the country. He would spend hours with her every day, reading his grandfather's letters, playing the classical music she had loved, and just sitting with her in silence. There were good days and bad days. Days when she would look at him and whisper, "William," and days when she looked through him as if he were glass, but she was home. His relationship with Sarah and Lily transformed from a strange, mystical quest into a quiet, tentative friendship. He didn't just offer them money, he offered them himself. He set up a trust that would ensure they never had to worry about rent or bills again, framing it not as charity, but as a repayment of the debt his family owed hers for Eleanor's loyalty. Sarah, resistant at first, finally accepted, seeing it as a way to give Lily the stability she had never had. Lily became a regular visitor to the penthouse. The solemn, silent child seemed to bloom in the presence of Elizabeth. She would sit for hours, drawing pictures for the old woman, pictures of gardens and starry nights and smiling people. The doctors were amazed. They said that the child's presence seemed to soothe Elizabeth in a way no medicine could. Lily, in turn, began to change. One afternoon, as she was showing Elizabeth a drawing of a bright yellow sun, she looked up at Alistair and said her first word to him. Not his name, but a question. "Happy?" she asked, pointing from the drawing to Elizabeth's placid face. Alistair felt his throat tighten. "Yes, Lily," he managed to say. "Very happy." He began to dismantle his old life. He stepped down as CEO of his company, appointing a trusted successor and retaining a position on the board. The relentless pursuit of wealth no longer held any meaning for him. He had found the true Finch legacy, and it wasn't in a stock portfolio. It was in a box of old letters and the quiet courage of his grandparents. He established the Eleanor O'Malley and William Finch Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to funding arts programs for underprivileged children and providing resources for families dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia. He asked Sarah to sit on the board of directors, not as a figurehead, but as a founding partner. She had a perspective he lacked, a compassion he was only just beginning to learn. One evening, Alistair was in his office, the vast room that had once been the command center for his empire. But instead of stock tickers on the screens, they now displayed a rotating gallery of Lily's drawings. He was looking at the first one, the crumpled napkin, now carefully preserved and framed on his wall. It was a monument to his own ignorance and the beginning of his salvation. Sarah came into the room holding 2 mugs of tea. She had been helping him sort through his grandfather's letters, organizing them into a coherent story. They had fallen into an easy, comfortable rhythm, 2 people from different worlds finding common ground in a shared history. "Find anything new?" she asked. "Just the same old story," he said, smiling. "A man who would do anything for the woman he loved." "It's a good story," she said, handing him a mug. They stood together, looking out at the city lights. It was the same view he had looked at on the night of the gala, but it was different now. It was no longer a kingdom to be ruled, but a community to be a part of. From the other room, they heard a faint sound. It was Lily's voice, clear and bright, followed by a soft, breathy laugh. It was a sound they hadn't heard before. They walked to the door of Elizabeth's suite and looked in. Lily was on the floor, and Elizabeth was leaning forward in her wheelchair, her hand outstretched, a genuine, lucid smile on her face. The child had told her a joke, or shown her a funny drawing. For a single, perfect moment, the fog had completely lifted, and she was not a patient, but a grandmother, sharing a moment of joy with a little girl. Alistair looked at Sarah, and in her moss-green eyes he saw the same quiet wonder he felt in his own heart. He had started his journey looking for a treasure to reclaim his past, but in mocking a little girl's drawing, he had been given a map to his future. It was a future that wasn't built on power or wealth, but on the simple, priceless foundation of family, forgiveness, and a second chance.